year-round.
It is good to see you out this morning. I want to echo what Mike said about those little pieces of paper. If you know somebody that's in need in any way, or that would like a fruit basket, that during this coming holiday season, we hopefully will be able to get those supplies together and get those put together and get those handed out to various ones in the coming month. We also mentioned that we're looking at sending out the house-to-house, heart-to-heart little magazine again after the first of the year. And so we want to encourage everybody to get excited about that going out again. We don't have a meeting to advertise in at this time, but we'll see about sometime we can put an article on the back page or something like that. I'll check with them about what we can do. We are on our third in our series of 4 lessons on our giving, perfectly proper present presenting. And we have looked already at 10 different things, all starting with the letter P, that describe our giving. I wanted, again, I mentioned it during class. I know some of you weren't here for that class earlier. So I want to echo that again at this time. A lot of times when a preacher's preaching about giving, people think, well, he's berating me because I'm not giving, or he wants me to give more, or thinks I should be giving more. I want to tell you that I feel kind of like Paul did about the church in Corinth, where he had bragged to other churches about how Corinth was ready to give and eager to give. I think the church here, is as small in number as we are, gives a lot. And we do a lot of good with what we give. Obviously, we have some of our own upkeep and bills to take care of here, but we also give to those in need. And like the paper that we've handed out, that is there for us to find some other ways that we can give and share. In the time that I've been here, and I keep track of the attendance and the giving and everything, and in the time I've been here, our giving has gone up every year. We're giving more each year than we gave the year before. And that's good. That's wonderful. So I don't want anybody to feel like I'm trying to browbeat you into giving more. If you feel guilty because you're not giving enough, that's your business. That's between you and God if you're not giving like you ought to. But as a congregation as a whole, I'm very pleased with how much we give and how much good we're able to do with what we give, of spreading the gospel and helping those in need and various different things. And so those are all good things. But as we consider some more about understanding about our giving, because we want to be sure that we're giving for the right reasons and with the right understanding, and that we're not doing it out of necessity, because God loves a cheerful giver. So we want to be doing so in a way that's going to be pleasing to God in every way. In Matthew chapter 6 and verses 19 and 20, Jesus said, as part of his Sermon on the Mount, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal." So Jesus talking about the way that we give is going to save us from storing up our treasures in places where it can get destroyed. If we will give properly to God, that can be something that can never be destroyed. And it's a wonderful thing. And we are blessed so much by God that we could never begin to repay him for what he has done for us. And that's, some people think their giving is somehow, well, I'm paying God back. We could never pay God back. That's not what it's about. But it is because he gave us so much, we want to give to his work so that that work can spread out to others and help others. Whether it is a physical need, a material, financial type need, or whether it's an emotional or spiritual need. Of course, the greatest need that mankind has is that of a Savior. And that's what the gospel is all about. And that's why we use funds to support mission works and missionaries and the preaching of the gospel and the sending out of the gospel in written form and various different things, a website where the gospel is available and things like that. We want to be sure that everybody has access to the good news of salvation that's in Jesus Christ. And so we want to do that as much as we possibly can. And the more funds we have, the more we can send out, the more we can reach out, and the more people that can be saved as a result. And that's a wonderful thing. Jesus, of course, compared the value of one human soul to more money than there is in the entire world. So if we can even save one person, it'd be worth whatever we had to spend to get the gospel to that individual. So we want to start then, our 11th thing as we're considering our giving is that it is to be proportional. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16 in verses 1 and 2, Paul says, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do you. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by in store as God has prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come." You notice that phrase, as God has prospered him. We are to give based on how much God has given to us. Some of us are more blessed financially than others. Some of us are more blessed with talents than others. Some of us are more blessed with time than others. So whatever our blessings are, we are to give proportional to the blessings that God has given us. Some of us are blessed with more age and wisdom, and some of us are blessed with youth and strength. You know, there are all kinds of blessings that God gives us, and again, we've mentioned this in the past 2 weeks, and we'll mention it again. I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but I want us to get that it's not just about money. Money's part of it, giving of our resources financially, yes, but that's not all there is to our giving. We are to give of ourselves. We're to give of our time. We're to give of our talents that God has blessed us with. And we're to use our lives as living sacrifices to him. And so we're to continue to do that. But it's proportional. If somebody doesn't have anything, they can't give anything. You can't get blood out of a turnip. And if we don't have, then we don't have anything to give. But as God has prospered us, and we talked a little bit about this, you know, some people get a check once a month. Some people get paid every week rather. So those that get paid every week may give every week. Those that get paid every month, maybe only give one time a month because that's when they prosper. And so they give out of that. There are sometimes we may be swamped with busyness and we don't have much time at all to give. Other times we may have a section of free time and we may be able to give more. And so it varies from week to week, from month to month, from year to year. It's not a set in stone situation. Sometimes we can give more time. Maybe a young couple that doesn't have any children yet, maybe they have more time. Maybe an older retired person has a little more time. You know, then it just is something that we have to consider based on how much we've been prospered in that area. Now, when I say we have more time, obviously everybody has the same number of hours every day. But some of us have more things that are calling for that time than others at different times. Sometimes we have a lot of things calling our time. Sometimes it's a little bit less. I think they say one thing about when you become an adult, it's just like one day you got busy and then you never stopped being busy. And sometimes that's the way it feels. You just feel like you're getting further and further behind every day. Well, maybe, but we still need to carve out some of that time for God, because He has given us another day to live, another week to live. And every time that He gives us more time to live, we need to be sure that we're giving Him back some of that. Let's think about this, called the welfare tithe. And this basically, we talked about the fact that the tithe is an Old Testament concept of, and it really is a word that just means a tenth. Under the Old Testament law, they were to give a tithe. They were to give a tenth of everything. Whether it was, if they had 10 sheep, they gave one of the sheep. If they had 10 acres of crops, they'd give one of those acres of crops when it was harvested. If they had 10 shekels, they'd give 1 shekel. It was a tenth of whatever it was. And to the point, the Pharisees were meticulous about this. Even if they had a little herb garden outside their kitchen window and they had 10 leaves of mint, they'd take one of those leaves of mint and give it to God. They were meticulous about it. And Jesus said, that's fine that you're meticulous about that, but He said, you've missed the big picture. You've left undone the weightier matters like love and justice and mercy. And so it's okay to be meticulous in the giving down to even the little leaf of mint off of your herb garden. But the point being that the tithe was a tenth, 1/10 of everything. It's interesting, though, statistically speaking, this study was done that said that if every church member in the United States were to suddenly lose his or her job and go on welfare, and yet were willing to tithe from the minimal amount on welfare, or maybe if they all were on Social Security or SSI disability or whatever the case might be, said if they were willing to tithe from that amount that they received from public assistance, giving in the nation's churches would immediately increase about 30%. That tells me that a lot of people aren't giving. They're getting, but they're not giving. Love of the right use of money is a root of all kinds of good, whereas the love of money itself could be a root of all kinds of evil. But if we love using it the right way, the good that we can do, we talked about last week how profound the good that can be done is with our giving. If we'll all give, if we all work together. There are things that we as a congregation do because we can gather together. Everybody gives some that individually we'd never be able to do. We send thousands of dollars to various different good works throughout the year. That's money. I don't know about you, but I couldn't send thousands of dollars to something myself. But by putting mine in and you put yours in and we gather it together, we're able to give a lot together. And so that's something for us to consider. But it is proportional to how much God has blessed us and how much we've been prospered by Him during that particular time period. The 12th thing that we consider is that it is patterned. There's a pattern for our giving, and we need to follow that pattern. Again, in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, in verses 1 and 2, Paul writes to the Corinthian church and lays out for them the pattern of how they're supposed to do this. Concerning the collection for the saints. Now, this was a collection that they were taking up to send back to Jerusalem because there was a famine in the land of Judea, in the land around Jerusalem. There was a famine, and some of the Christians there were in need. And so they're specifically taking up a collection to be sent back to that land to help the needy saints. So he says, concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia. So I don't know how many churches there were in Galatia, but there were several. And he said, I've given all of those churches these same instructions. He says, even so do ye. So I told them how to do it, And I'm telling you how to do it. There's a pattern here. And that pattern is established and has been established and continues to be followed by many churches throughout the world, even today, 2,000 years later. He says, upon the first day of the week, every one lay by and store as God has prospered him, so there'll be no gatherings when I come. But he said he's coming to get the funds and take them at a certain time. He says, I don't want you to wait until I get there and then you have to gather it all together. He said, every week, go ahead and give it and store it up. Have it ready so that it'll be there when I get there to take it. That was the pattern. It's interesting. This isn't necessarily specifically about giving. But I always think about this when I read about this. The same terminology that is used here concerning upon the first day of the week, it's the same terminology that's used regarding the Lord's Supper, our communion. And what I find fascinating is I've yet to meet a church, I've yet to meet a pastor of a church or any religious leader of any organization that doesn't take up collection at least every week. Some of them take up 4 or 5 of them. But everyone takes up a collection on the first day of every week. Now, it doesn't say every there. It just says upon the first day of the week. Well, every week has a first day, and it's a convenient time. We're already gathered together, and it makes sense. And Paul said, do it this way, so that makes sense. However, those very same churches, they would not miss a Sunday of taking up a collection if their life depended on it. They'd find a way to take up that collection. And yet, when it comes to the partaking of the bread and the cup to remember our Lord's death, they do that once every quarter or once a month. It's interesting. But it's the same wording. Upon the first day of the week, lay by and store. Upon the first day of the week, the disciples came together to break bread. Same terminology. And the breaking of bread there is the reference to the Lord's Supper. The same terminology. When we're gathered together on the first day of the week, we take the Lord's Supper and we take the collection. I don't know why some people can't see that they're the same. I don't know. That's not about our giving necessarily, except for our giving of attention to the pattern that God has laid out for us to do it the way that he taught us to do it. Convenient debts. Talk about patterns. One man received a sharp letter from one of his creditors demanding payment be given to them. So he wrote back to them and said, Dear sir, every month I take all the bills I have and I put them on the table. I shuffle them and I pick out 6 that I pay. He said, now, if I have any more trouble out of you, next month I'll take you out of the shuffle. Well, that's a pattern of a sort. And I've known some folks who were enough behind on their bills, that was the only choice they had. They had to pay, they paid what they could of some, they paying the minimum payment they could pay. And they still had to skip some from one month, and maybe next month we'll pay that one. And some of them shuffled like that. You have to shuffle those bills when times were hard. The question, though, is, have we shuffled God out of our giving? Have we shuffled him out? Because he needs to be first priority and first place. But the pattern that we have is to give regularly. Then we see the 13th thing, that our giving is to be purposeful. It's not just an accident. It's not just they're passing the collection basket. What have I got in my pockets? Do I have anything? Oh, there's a little change in a dollar bill. I'll drop it in. Now, obviously, there are circumstances. Sometimes things happen. We've maybe forgot to prepare for some reason. But it should be purposeful. It should be planned out like that. In Philippians chapter 4 and verses 14 through 17, He says to the church in Philippi, notwithstanding you have done well that you did communicate with my affliction. Now, you Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but you only. For even in Thessalonica you sent once and again to my necessity, not because I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. There's a purpose for our giving. In this case, they were giving to Paul's necessity. They were helping him. Paul says to the church in Corinth, I robbed other churches to preach the gospel to you. Other churches were supporting Paul so that he could preach to the church in Corinth. And perhaps the church in Philippi was one of those churches at that time. They certainly were one that supported him regularly. But he said they continued to do it. He depended on them. He could count on them. There was a purpose for their giving. Our giving needs to have a purpose. That's one of the things we're talking about. Because our giving has gone up, we have more available than we've been used to having. So now we go, okay, we need to have a purpose for that money. So it's not just sitting there. We need to use it to glorify God and to bring glory to Him. I'm glad my church needs my money. I'm glad my church needs money. If it didn't, it would mean it wasn't supporting missionaries and preaching the gospel in other places and has no missionary zeal. I'm glad my church needs money. If it didn't, it would mean it wasn't doing anything to support the needy and had no compassion. I'm glad my church needs money. If it didn't, it would mean it wasn't interested in providing wholesome activities for young people and had no concern. I'm glad my church needs money. If it didn't, it would mean it wasn't interested in teaching children in those impressionable years and had no future. There are a lot of things that the church uses money. And, they say money makes the world go round. And we wish that spiritually that wasn't the case, that we could do everything without any money. Unfortunately, heating and air conditioning and lights cost money. A building costs money. Us having a place to meet, it costs money. Everything we do costs money. And we have to deal with that. But I'm glad that my church needs money to do the things that it's set out to do, to reach out to the lost. I've always said that there are two purposes of the church. One is to seek and save the lost, and the other is to keep the saved saved. So those are the two purposes of the church, and it takes money to do both of those things in one way or another. But we can be glad that the church is doing things and needs money because of that. A dead church doesn't need any money. It's just sitting there decaying. The building's decaying. The grounds are unkept. Nothing's happening. Nobody's coming. They don't need any money. But if a church is alive, it's going to take money to keep that moving forward and growing. The 14th thing we want to consider is that our giving is to be predetermined. And again, we talk about not just, I get here, today I feel like giving a little more. Today, I don't really feel like giving much. It's predetermined. It's planned ahead. In 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 5, he says, therefore I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren that they would go before unto you and make up beforehand your bounty, whereof you had noticed before that the same might be ready as a matter of bounty and not as of covetousness. So go ahead and plan ahead. That's why he talked about there in 1 Corinthians 16. Give it on the first day of the week. Don't wait until I get there and say, what have I got left to give you? It needs to be predetermined. In 2 Corinthians 8 and verses 10 and 11, he says, and herein I give my advice, for this is expedient for you who have begun before not only to do, but also to be forward a year ago. So a year ago, they were talking about what they were going to do. He says, now, therefore, perform the doing of it. You predetermined it. You planned it a year ago. Now, it's time. Keep your word. Do what you said you'd do. He says, now perform the doing of it, that as there was a readiness of will, so there may be a performance also out of that which you have. Now, there are times where we plan and our plans don't work out. Somebody may plan to give a certain amount in the coming year, and maybe they lose their job. Maybe a couple plans to give a certain way or do a certain thing, and one of them gets sick, or even worse, one of them passes away, and they're not able to then anymore. There are times where our plans fail. But that doesn't mean that we just quit planning altogether. We still plan. We still predetermine what we're going to do and what our plan is. We make a budget. We make a plan for it. Here are some spiritual rules for giving. At least a thought about it. It's not really a set of rules. It's really just a story. What place does God have in your budget? Do you give him what's left? Or do you take his off the top and then figure out what you're going to do with what's left? That's a good question for us to think about. There was an African convert who loved the Lord and earned money by making and selling a very special kind of bean cake that she'd made. And she was always very conscientious about her giving out of the money that she made selling those cakes. But she suffered an injury, and for a time, she wasn't able to make the cakes. Well, after a long while of healing, she was again going to be able to make the cakes, and she promised the missionary, I'm going to give a third of my earnings, not just 10%, I'm going to give a third of them. And her goal for the first week was to make a profit of 3, whatever their currencies was. 3 of those. Well, the missionary was surprised. So when the woman returned after only 2 days with 1 of their dollars or what have you, whatever their version of a dollar is, he was surprised. He said, surely you haven't earned your $3 already. And the woman looked at him. She said, what, do you think I'd give God the last? This is the first of the 3. The other 2 will be mine. She purposed it. She planned ahead. She gave him the first one, not the last one. That was under the law of Moses the way it worked. The first fruits were offered, not the dregs that are left at the end of the season. God got of the first that came ripe and was harvested, the best of the harvest. And this woman felt the same way. She said, this is the first one, and it belongs to him. The other 2, when I make them, they'll be for me. So we need to think about our priorities. What do we give him what's left over, or do we give him first? And then we deal with the rest. The 15th thing, the 5th for the day today, and the last one we're looking at this morning, is that it is pleasant. Now, I know some people don't like giving. They grumble, they gripe, they're grouchy about it. If that's the case, there's something wrong. There's covetousness in the heart. There's a bad attitude of some kind pushing that. Because giving as God wants, perfectly proper present presenting, is pleasant. It's an enjoyable thing. And part of that, I talked to the church, the men in the church all the time. Whenever we do give something, I want to be sure we announce it and let everybody in the congregation know where their money's going. Because when you're giving to something and you don't know what's happening with that money, that gets a little frustrating too when you don't know, well, how much money, what money, and where's it going, and what's being done with that. And there have been plenty of cases where people were giving money to things and later to find out it was just being pocketed and somebody's keeping it, you know. We've got people resetting our store this week, and one of them was telling, he said, well, I went to this one church, he said, they took up 4 collections. And he said, and then the pastor got up and preached, and he said, and after that, he said, when he finished preaching, and then he said, now Sister so-and-so is going to have surgery, so I'm going to ask y'all to dig deep one more time. He said, the guy's got 2 jet airplanes and got 3 houses, but he's wanting them to dig deep to give to Sister so-and-so. He said, well, you already took up 4 collections. Why can't you give her out of one of those? Well, when you don't know where the money's going, or if you don't know if it's going to get there, even though that's where it supposedly was going to go. That's why transparency is important. Knowing where the money goes, knowing what the money's doing, that it is being used for a good cause. But that helps to make it more pleasant to give when we know it's going to something good and we can see the fruits of that taking place. In Acts chapter 20 and verse 35, Paul says, I have showed you all things, how that so laboring you ought to support the weak and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Giving is supposed to be something that brings blessings. That phrase, more blessed, really means makes you happier. There are blessings and happiness that comes from giving when we know it's something good. That's why we aren't real happy to pay our tax bill, because what are they going to do with this money? But if we're giving to the church and we're seeing the good that's being done by the church, then we ought to be happy to give. There are some people that are just greedy and covetous and they don't want to let go of a nickel, and they're never going to be happy to give, but they're missing out on some of the great blessings in life. Because giving is a blessing. It's supposed to be pleasant. It's supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to be something you look back on and have good memories of. Do you have good memories of times you gave? Some time that you gave something to someone or for a certain cause and good was done, and you remember that, and oh yeah, I remember when I did that. It feels good to remember that. The story is told of King Monobaz of Adiabin. He had converted to Judaism back in the day, and there was a famine in his kingdom, and he distributed all of the treasures of his treasury to help the poor in that year of famine in his country. His brothers sent to him and said, our fathers gathered treasures and added to those of their fathers, but you have dispersed yours and theirs. And he said to them, my fathers gathered treasures for below. I have gathered treasures for above. They stored treasures in places over which the hand of man can rule. I have stored treasures in a place over which the hand of man cannot rule. My fathers collected treasures which bear no interest. I have gathered treasures which bear interest. My fathers gathered treasures of money. I have gathered treasures in souls. My fathers gathered treasures for others. I have gathered treasures for myself. My fathers gathered treasures for this world. I have gathered treasures for the world to come. Both Jesus and even the Jewish rabbis before him and even after him were quite sure that what was selfishly hoarded was lost. But what was generously given brings treasure in heaven. Are you laying up treasures in heaven where moth and rust cannot destroy, where thieves cannot break in and steal it? Or are you storing it up here on earth? You can't take this with you. but what you send ahead will help to build your home in heaven. Now, the story is told that, and some of these stories, obviously, this isn't really the way heaven works, but the story is told of how somebody had done nothing of good really much with their life, but they just squeaked into heaven anyway. And St. Peter is showing them around, and they walked past these big, beautiful mansions, and he sees people who on earth had just been nobodies to him. And yet they're living in these big, beautiful mansions, and he thought, boy, if these nobodies have got a mansion like that, what's my place going to look like? And they keep walking, and as they walk, the mansions get smaller, and then after a while, they're just nice houses, and a little further, they're just kind of a small little suburban home, and they keep going, and he's like, what's going on? We're getting further away from the nice places. They finally get down to just little shacks, and they finally get down to the end of the street, and there's a cardboard box sitting there, and Peter says, this one's yours. And he said, what? We passed all those mansions back there. Why do I get this little cardboard box? Peter said, well, we can only build with what you send us. Are you laying up treasures in heaven? Are you building up your heavenly home? Or are you more concerned about this life and your home here than what your home in heaven will be like? If you're here and you have a need to respond to God's invitation for any reason, whatever the case may be, please respond as we stand and sing our invitation song.
Jesus is tenderly
calling me home, calling today.